Continuing in 2.4, I want to talk about another form of line. So we've talked about slope-intercept form, we've talked about point-slope form. The last form that we need to talk about is called standard form. Standard form, and you can see kind of the instructions here at the top, standard form is written basically in alphabetical order. You're going to always put your x term first, plus or minus your b term, and then your equal sign, and then your c term, which is your constant. So you're going to have your x's, then your y's, those are going to be together on the left side of the equal sign, and then any constant you have is going to be on the right side. So the first thing you want to check is make sure the terms are in order. The second thing that you need to do with standard form does not allow any fractions. So you can't have a 1/2 in front of the x. You can't have a 2/3 in it. It has to be all integers. Integers meaning 5, 3, -2, any positive or negative whole number. So 2 steps when you're doing standard form. 1 is you need to do something called clear fractions, and 2 is you need to reorder it. So I want to show you how to clear fractions. So if you look at these 2 examples that we have here, and the directions say rewrite in standard form, and it reminds us that we have to be working with integers. What you want to do is you want to see if there are any fractions present to start with. If there are, you want to look at the denominator. So right now we see we have a denominator of 2 in each of these. In order to clear fractions, if you have the same denominator in any fraction, you're going to multiply every single term by that denominator. So I like to put it in a huge parentheses to remind me that everything is getting multiplied by 2. The x term, the y term, the constant, everything. So when I multiply y by 2, I get 2y equals. When I take 2 times 3/2, and you can use a calculator if you want, the 2's will cancel. You get 3x. And then when I multiply the 2 times a -1/2, I get -1. So that is step 1. Make sure that there are no fractions left. And you'll notice if you multiply by something that works, there are no fractions left. The second and final step is it needs to be in the right order. The x term needs to come first. So I'm going to move just this x term to the left by subtracting. So my standard form is -3x plus 2y equals -1. No fractions, and it's in the correct order. X term, then y term, then equal sign, then constant. If you have one that has 2 different denominators, so if you look here, we have a denominator of 5 and a denominator of 10. What you have to do is you have to multiply by what would be the common denominator. So the common denominator between a 5 denominator and a 10 is 10. So you're going to multiply everything by 10. When I multiply by 10, I get 10y equals, when I do 10 times -4/5, I get -8x. And then when I do 10 times 1/10, I get 1. Again, if you picked a number that correctly clears fractions, you will have no fractions left when you do that multiplication. And then finally, it's in the wrong order because the x term's in the wrong spot. So I'm going to add the 8x to the other side. So when I do that, I have 8x first, then plus 10y, then the equal sign, then 1. Fractions are gone. It is in the correct order. There are some that ask you to put it in standard form that are way easier. So when you're putting something in standard form, the first thing you should think is I need to get rid of fractions. If there aren't fractions, so if you look at this one, there aren't fractions, you can skip that step. We're going to go right to the second step, which says put it in the right order. So to put it in the right order, the x term needs to move to the other side. So I have -9x plus 1y, or just y, equals -3, and it is done. So you will have some that are that easy, that have no fractions. You can ignore that step and go straight to just putting it in the correct order to get it in standard form. So this is just a quick recap. I want to make sure you're comfortable with all the different forms. These are nice forms to have in your notes and label what they're called. So our first form, the one you're probably the most comfortable with, is y equals mx plus b. This is called slope-intercept form. This is the form that you're going to use if you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, because then you're putting the 2 things in and you're done. The second form, the one that we used in the last lesson, is called point-slope form. This is the form that you're going to use if you have the slope and you have another point. So not the y-intercept, but maybe you have a random point like 2, 5, something like that. And then finally, standard form, the one we're talking about today. Standard form isn't great when it comes to talking about slope, but what's great about standard form is it allows you to very quickly find where it crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. And I'm going to recap this on the next slide, but the idea is the x-intercept is going to happen when y is 0, and the y-intercept is going to happen when x equals 0. So what you're doing, if you think about a graph, x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. So here's your x-axis. Y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. If I can get a point on the x-axis and a point on the y-axis, that allows me to graph the line. It's the only form that actually never talks about slope. So when I do this, when I help students with this, I call this the cover-up method. What I mean by the cover-up method is if I want to find the x-intercept, I let y be 0. Essentially, I cover up the y terms. If I want y to equal the y-intercept, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to cover up the x terms. So probably the easiest to show this with changing colors on my pen here. So this one, again, it's in standard form. The directions want to know what the x-intercept is and what the y-intercept is, and then we're going to graph the equation using that. So by doing the cover-up method, I'm going to change my pen here, I'm going to find the x-intercept by covering up the y. So pretend like that y is not even there, and I'm going to write down what is there, which is x is -4. That means my x-intercept is -4, 0. My x-intercept, just to kind of review, my x-intercept is always going to be a number, comma, 0. My y-intercept is always going to be 0 and then a number. So now to find the y-intercept, let me get rid of my cover up there. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to cover up the x's. So I'm going to get rid of the x's. So kind of think that it's blackened out, and I'm going to do what's left. So 3y equals -4. Divide by 3 to solve for y. So that means my y-intercept is 0, -4/3. So then the way you graph it is you're going to graph the x-intercept on the x-axis and the y-intercept on the y-axis. So on my x-axis, I'm going to go to -4 and I'm going to put a point. On the y-intercept, -4/3 is a little smaller than -1, so I'm going to put it just below -1, and then I'm going to connect those points. Didn't connect that second one, great. But as long as you have the work off to the side, you are good. This next one, same directions. We're going to find the x-intercept by covering up the y's. So I'm going to start with that. So I'm going to cover up the y's. I'm going to just kind of go like that. So my y's are covered up, so I'm going to write down what's left. I'm left with -5x equals -6. Divide by -5. So my x-intercept is 6/5. So you could write it as a decimal if you want. That's 1.2. So my x-intercept is 6/5, 0. And then I'm going to cover up, get rid of this cover up, and then I'm going to cover up the x's to get my y-intercept. So when I do that, I'm left with -2y equals -6. Divide by -2, you get 3. That means your y-intercept is at the point 0, 3. So on my graph, let me see the best way. Maybe I can draw it like this. I'm going to go to 0, 3. So that's on the y-axis here. And then 6/5 is a little bit bigger than 1. So I'm going to go right about here. Let me see if I can make these a little bit bigger. So here and here. And then I'm going to connect the dots. And that is my line graphing with the y and x intercept. This one, same directions. So I'm going to cover up the y so I can get the x-intercept. So I have -x equals -4. That means positive x equals +4. So my x-intercept is 4, 0. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my covering up my x's. So when I cover up my x's, I'm left with 3y equals -4. Divide by 3. So I get y equals -4/3. That means my y-intercept is at 0, -4/3. So on my picture, I am going to put an x-intercept and a y-intercept. Try to get the right amount of point here. So my x-intercept was 4, 0. So I'm going to go over 4 on the x-axis and put a point. And then -4/3 is a little smaller than -1. So I'm going to put a point. And then I'm going to connect the dots. And that gives me my x-intercept, my y-intercept, and the graph of my line. That's it on standard form. You should be comfortable rewriting in standard form, and you should be comfortable graphing in standard form with the cover-up method. You will always find two intercepts, an x-intercept and a y-intercept, to do so.